Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to
Dr. Eric Rudenshiold, adjunct lecturer at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies and former National Security Council Director for Central Asia under two presidents, joins us from Washington, D.C. Dr. Eric, hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkans channel, and thank you so much for taking time to speak to us now. Having worked on U.S. foreign policy towards Central Asia and the Caucasus under multiple administrations, how would you characterize Washington's approach to the region? I mean, has there been a consistent strategic vision, or has U.S. engagement been largely dictated by shifting geopolitical priorities and by retroactive or reactive policy making?
Well, it's a complex question. I think when it comes to Central Asia, the United States has been very consistent since the independence of these countries in the late, early 1990s,
yeah.
the late 80s. I think there's been a very forward lean towards these countries and a really strong emphasis on trying to promote their independence, help them achieve their sovereignty, their economic sovereignty particularly. When it comes to the Caucasus, the United States has had a more mixed policies, because you have Georgia, which was the rising star, the democracy of the region for a long time. You had the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and so as a result, there's been this mixed engagement with the Caucasus region in general. But what we see taking place now actually may bring that to a very different style of engagement, as Armenia and Azerbaijan appear to be reconciling their differences and moving forward.
Right, that is quite a significant development in the Caucasus, but we'll get back to that in a while. But I want to ask you, you have served under two presidents at the NSC. In your view, were there any significant policy shifts between the Republican and the Democratic president?
Well, not really. I drafted a national security strategy for Central Asia under President Trump. It was very forward-leaning, very pro-engagement with the region. And the Biden administration looked at the strategy and said, yeah, this is exactly the feeling we have towards the region. They didn't change a word of it and adopted the same strategy, a full-throated endorsement of the region's independence, its efforts to achieve its independence from its large neighbors, but most importantly, to see the regency elevate itself and gain agency, which is exactly what has been happening in the last multiple years.
Right, but why didn't we see more sustained U.S. engagement in the region? I mean, I remember back, after the 9/11 attacks, there was quite a bit of U.S. military cooperation with Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan because they use these countries as forward operating bases. But afterwards, I have a feeling that the U.S. never really engaged larger countries such as Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan.
Well, I think if you look at it through the lens of U.S. engagement with Afghanistan, then yes, Central Asia was
right.
Very important in terms of the bases. But the U.S. never looked at Central Asia strictly through the prism of Afghanistan. And I think that's an important distinction that a lot of people don't make. They judge the number of troops traveling through the region, the number of airplanes that the region was moving, but the reality is there was very separate and very tight engagement with Central Asia itself that I think is something that sometimes gets overlooked, much to the detriment of understanding how the United States really supports Central Asia.
And how does it exactly support Central Asia? In what sense?
Well, I think the U.S. business engagement with Central Asia has been robust.
Okay.
Our energy engagement, you see some of the largest investments of U.S. companies globally in Central Asia. And I think you see a continuing cascade of U.S. interests. And, now we're looking at strategic minerals. You see U.S. business push to engage with this region. U.S. government has worked very hard to help develop an enabling environment in Central Asia that facilitates U.S. businesses. Obviously, basic rule of law standards are needed for U.S. business to operate in a lot of these countries. I think you also see the U.S. partnering with the Central Asians on issues of security. We all share mutual concerns about potential spread of terrorism, and Central Asia has been a strong partner. All 5 countries have been strong partners with the United States, and I think we've seen that consistently over a couple of decades.
Right. Now, if you look at, China's Belt and Road Initiative, which largely passes through Central Asia, the Caucasus, towards Europe. If you look at Moscow's historical dominance in the region, if you could advise the current president and the administration on how the U.S. should recalibrate, its engagement strategy to remain a relevant player in Central Asia and the Caucasus, what would you tell them?
Well, I think if you look at the region as a prisoner of its geography, then yes, Russia and China dominate the landscape. The Central Asians are very aware of their geography, more so, I think, than everyone else is.
Right.
I think you look at what happened over the last several years, where Central Asia has, because of sanctions, had to diversify the way it does business. You see Central Asia reaching westward across the Caspian, building partnerships with Azerbaijan, with Georgia, reaching across to Turkey. You see a very significant change and shift in the way they do business, who they do business with. And I think these are exactly the kinds of things that the U.S. has supported over the years. Not that, they won't do business with their neighbors. Countries always do business with their neighbors. That's smart. Right. But they're doing business now with other countries. And what we have always sought for the region is, and I would counsel, and I have counseled the new administration, is to really work to help facilitate the continued bloom of this region and its sense of agency, that it actually can do business on its own terms, not terms dictated to it by its neighbors or by its geography. And thus you see, the creation of the Middle Corridor, reaching across, from Central Asia all the way across the Caucasus to Europe. We saw actually, last week, historically, we saw the first transshipment of goods from Japan to China, through Central Asia, through the Caucasus to Europe. And this is only just the beginning of this massive corridor. It's in its development cycle. It's only really just starting. And the economies of scale are just going to continue to grow as we move forward.
Right. Are you noticing any changes when it comes to the identity of Central Asian states, particularly Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Are these countries sort of becoming much more aware of their national identity and sort of trying to, to carve out their own space in foreign affairs and foreign policy?
I think we see this, frankly, in almost all 5 of the Central Asian states. We've seen them. They have not supported Russia directly. Okay. They have, in many cases, been very sympathetic towards Ukraine. The shift in territorial claims, Russia claiming territories of Ukraine, I think is a warning shot to the Central Asians, something that they very much oppose internally. And I think as a result, we have seen engagement by these countries with Ukraine, with others. Again, it has helped drive their vision of becoming more economically sovereign and basically to be able to rise up. And again, I think, not to be prisoners of their own territory. And what, it's fascinating to watch this network of east-west trading routes, as well as a north-south trading route that Russia is trying to achieve with Iran. You see this region start to really develop this sense of place, that we're in the middle of all of this and they need us. And each side needs us in order to be able to transit. And with that, I think, has come a sense of agency for these countries. You know, but you raised the issue of Belt and Road Initiative, and I think there's something of a misnomer about that. We've tended to look at this transit corridor that China has tried to facilitate through BRI investments. And, you know, without those investments, certainly a lot of improvements wouldn't have been made, certain things wouldn't be achieved, but it is not a super highway for Chinese goods to move from Xi'an all the way across to Europe. Yes, some goods are moving that way, but in 2023, 95% of the goods moving on this middle corridor were from Central Asia and the Caucasus. They're trading with each other, and they're trading westward in ways that has never happened before. And I think that's a proof of concept that this middle corridor is something much more than just a highway between the East and the West. Right. Now, you touched upon the middle corridor, and of course, this is something that geopolitical analysts and economic analysts know quite a bit about. But to the average viewer in Italy, in Spain, in Portugal, I mean, these terms may not be that close, that familiar to them. So, how would you really explain to the average viewer the strategic importance of the middle corridor as an alternative trade route bypassing Russia? And what are the biggest, I mean, we know that it hasn't been realized to its fullest. What are the biggest barriers to its full realization? Well, I think, because of sanctions, because of the imposition of controls on what can and can't ship through Russia, and this major northern corridor line that transits Russia, we've seen the need for the Central Asians particularly, but also China to a large degree, has looked for alternative ways to move goods from east to west and west to east. Certainly, the shipping lanes, we see what's happened in the Red Sea, the Suez Canal. There's been a lot of challenges for the normal shipping lanes, which took longer to begin with, and overland. Russia's northern corridor has lost a tremendous amount of business because of sanctions. And so there was a lot of emphasis and interest in building this east-west connectivity. And we've seen within Central Asia a championing of efforts to harmonize customs, to digitalize their economies, and particularly when it comes to moving shipping, transport containers, rail cars, moving them across this really large terrain. And what we see is a massive shift in approach by the Central Asians, but also by China and also by Turkey and Europe, to build a network. And the middle corridor is not just a straight line. It is a network of various roads, rails, and sea opportunities in basically highways that, when brought together, actually moves goods across what is a multimodal, multiple transport system that did not exist 3 years ago. Now it's absolutely booming. And, what took 40 days before is now taking 12 to 14 days, and to move from one end to the other. And we're going to see those times come down. We're going to see a real improvement in how they're able to track goods, to tax goods as they do for transit purposes. But you're going to see the flow of goods start to become much more stable than it is now. And we've seen big improvements over the last year in particular, and the speed with which these changes take place are really quite remarkable. What does that mean for a European customer? Well, for warehouses in Europe to be able to keep supplies at a certain level, which is more profitable for them, they don't want to have oversupply, and they don't want to have an undersupply. Having a more rapid transit system to be able to move goods from China alone, but even Japan and now South Korea is being involved in this transit route. Maersk, the large company based out of Denmark, they're helping move these goods across this transit corridor. You see the global giants really focusing now on this middle corridor network. And I think with that kind of focus, we will see more and continued development to bring goods more rapidly, more economically from east to west and from west to east.
Right. You did touch upon Turkey. How do you view Turkey's relationship with Central Asian states? And would you say that Turkey, Ankara, can be considered a serious third player or fourth player in that region?
I mean, Turkey is a player. There's no question about it. They have close relationships with the Central Asians, with Azerbaijan.
Right.
They have partnerships that are absolutely critical to see the region's continued development, to see investment in the region. Turkey's businesses are all over Central Asia. And I think that's really an important element of the development trajectory for this region. We see Turkish business building rail lines. We see them working on new business facilities, warehouses. Turkey is very much a key component of this region's development. They're on the far western side. They are, the gateway to Europe. We see energy moving westward across this corridor through Turkey. We see goods moving across the rail lines, the sea lanes. All of this goes to Turkey, and then from there it goes to the rest of Europe. And they are an undeniable and really vital player in this. And so you see a lot of engagement between Ankara and the rest of the region, which I think is vital. And if we look at the peace arrangement that's blooming between Armenia and Azerbaijan, Turkey is a very much an important element of that process.
Now, the Caspian and the Caucasus are emerging as these regions are emerging as critical players in the global energy market. And we also see countries such as Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan deepening their energy partnerships with Europe and also with China. And I was wondering, how developed are current infrastructures, and are they able to transport large quantities of gas from Central Asia across the Caspian Sea and Turkey towards Europe, or will it take some time for these to develop to an optimal level?
Well, from my perspective, we need more and bigger and better. But obviously, the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline moves a tremendous amount of energy from the Caucasus to Turkey and on to Europe, just at the time where Europe needs to diversify its energy resources. So I think we can certainly celebrate that level of engagement. Azerbaijan is now supplying, I think, about 10 countries in Europe with gas for heating and for fuel. That's a relatively new development, but Turkmenistan has the world's fourth largest reserves of natural gas. If they were able to develop the pipeline across the Caspian, Kazakhstan, a major supplier of gas and oil particularly, they move oil primarily through Russia, but has had some serious problems for them in the past. Again, a pipeline across the Caspian would make a huge difference in, again, their ability to move energy, but also to reach global markets on their own 2 feet and not to have to deal with intermediary countries in terms of pricing.
Right.
But I think you look at the powerhouse that is the Central Asia and the Caucasus countries, and really in this day and age now, we kind of have to look at them both together, because all 8 countries share a tremendous sense of interest in reaching westward, into reaching to Western markets. And we also see them starting to have some of their economic fate linked with each other and not so tied specifically to Russia to the north in particular. Iran to the south is closed to a large degree, and China is far off, at least for the Caucasus, it's far off to the east. But we see Chinese development helping facilitate the connectivity within these 8 countries, but also onwards to Europe. So I think those are all really positive developments.
Right. Now, Dr. Eric, if you look at all these huge energy reserves in Central Asia, lots of rare earth minerals, strategic geographic position. are we back to the great game of the 19th century, between great global powers?
Well, I mean, it's certainly a calling card and an entry point for a lot of engagement in Central Asia. They need the technology, they need investment from other countries to develop these resources. And so I think this is really fodder for development that is positive for the region. I think the challenge for the Central Asians obviously is to maintain control of the process and not to cede their control, their ability to leverage the value of these resources in their own benefits. So if they sell cobalt or if they sell lithium, they want to maximize the benefit of those minerals from their territories, and that makes perfect sense. The way the business has run in the past is if they're mining out of Central Asia, it ends up having to get processed. And rare earths and strategic minerals, by and large, 90% of the processing of these minerals takes place in China. China's invested in smelters and refinery processes, and China's kind of got a lock on most of that. For the Central Asians, I think they would like to see, and I think from the United States perspective, there's an interest in engaging with the region to help them be able to develop the capacity to refine, not just to mine the minerals, but to refine them on their own territory, and then to sell refined minerals at a much higher price.
Right, exactly. Finally, you're a faculty member of the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, and you've been involved in the training of the new generation of foreign policy experts. So given the increasing complexity of U.S. engagement in Central Asia and the Caucasus, what knowledge gaps do you think exist among policymakers and analysts, and how should academic institutions like SAIS adapt to better prepare these future decision makers?
Well, I'm also a senior fellow at the Caspian Policy Center here in Washington, and I see in our work both as a think tank on the region, but then also in working with students, that you're right, there are definitely gaps and a lack of appreciation for how this region has grown and developed. I talk to people on a regular basis, and sometimes, often, unfortunately, you talk to people who are in the policy world, and they think of Central Asia or the Caucasus as if it was 10 or 15 years ago. And even this region 5 years ago is very different than the region that we see today. In the last several years, we have seen an absolute sea change in their attitudes, their approaches towards business, towards engagement, whether it's because Russia has invaded Ukraine or whether it's simply because sanctions have forced them to change the way they do business. It doesn't really matter. The result ends up being that these regions are much more interested in trying to capitalize on global affairs, the need for strategic minerals, the need for energy, but they're also looking for ways to develop and move their economies into whatever the next generation is, and not just to be beholden on energy as a source of income. And so they're making investments, and they're engaging academically with institutions here in the United States to train their own people to do more and better. I think from our side, it is always a challenge to follow these countries closely. They are in the middle of Asia, sometimes overlooked, but I think you overlook them now to your detriment. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that policymakers needs to understand moving forward is these countries can't be denied at this point. They are middle powers. They are centrally located, and they really are arbiters of how trade and transit through all of Asia is going to take place. That's a huge change over where we were just a few years ago.
Right. Dr. Eric Rudenshiold, it was such a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much once again for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to be